Go into our player focus now, and today we are discussing DeMar DeRozan, the shooting guard for the Toronto Raptors. DeRozan this year having a very quality season. I would say it's the best season of his career. Some may or may not disagree. I don't know who would, but certainly it's looking that way. Now, this is a guy who's never been on an All NBA team. I would expect him to get that this year. And we look at DeRozan over his last 5 games, over 30 points per game, just under 31 actually at 30.8. 3 assists for a shooting guard, not terrible, but you'd like to see them get those numbers up maybe just a bit. 6.3 rebounds per game. This is over his last 5, so that's good for a shooting guard. Overall this season, 23.9, so just shy of 24 points per game. 3.9 assists, 4.5 rebounds. So you see his assists are pretty much where they've been, but he's upped his rebounding game of late. So hats off to DeMar DeRozan. Now, DeRozan is a guy who will be a free agent at the end of this season, that is, going into next season. So a lot of teams will be looking for his services. He's averaging over 20 points per game over his last 3 seasons. Was at 22.7 in 13-14. Dropped it down to just over 20 points at 20.1 last year, but he's gotten it back up to his highest of his career now at 23.9. Consistent throughout his career, basically with his shooting percentage. It's actually dipped since his first season, but he wasn't taking nearly as many shots per game. He's been right around 44% after that. A couple years a little higher, a couple years a little lower, but he's a good 44% shooter. He's upped his rebounds, as we said, in every season, except last year went from 4.6 to 4.5, but other than that, it's gone up every year, and we just saw he was improving it in the last couple games, so hats off to him in that regard. And his assists, they've actually dipped from the 2013-2014 season, so let's see if he can't get that back up. But the 2013-2014 was his highest assist total. Now, as far as DeMar DeRozan, can he be the guy that carries Toronto to the finals? You would obviously like to start with this Toronto team. Can he carry them out of the first round? This is a team that has struggled. They haven't been out of the first round since they got into the playoffs in 2013-2014. It's been a long time for them. They lost to the Brooklyn Nets in 7 games that year. Last year, they were swept out by the Washington Wizards. Now, this is a team that's likely going to win at least 50, they're almost certainly going to win 50 games. I would like to see them get to 55, certainly a strong possibility. They may even get to 56, 57, which would be almost certainly the most games they've ever won in their franchise history. I don't think they've ever won. Actually, it has to be, because last year was the most games they won at, 48 or 49? So 50 wins will be the most they've ever had, and a 55-win campaign would be very good. DeMar DeRozan, a lot rides on Kyle Lowry as well, but I think DeRozan has to be the guy who's going to carry this team. If you look at how they're going to match up with a team like Cleveland, there's no guarantee that they get out of the second round. They could certainly face any one of those logjam teams. The Celtics, who they play tonight, Miami Heat could be interesting. You have Atlanta as well, and Charlotte. The only team that would really scare me out of that group would be the Miami Heat. You do have a lot of experience. You have a guy like a Joe Johnson who could mark up DeMar DeRozan. Joe Johnson a bit long there in the tooth, but there are certainly defenders you could throw at him for a Heat team. The Celtics, Marcus Smart, maybe Jay Crowder if they're going to bring him down from the forward position. Obviously, that would also depend on Jay Crowder coming back healthy. But I would look at Miami as the biggest threat to the Toronto Raptors, but I think they would be able to get past Miami. And team-to-team wise, Miami is also much more experienced. But going back to DeRozan and what he could do against the Cleveland Cavaliers, you look at it, with the point guard we obviously just discussed, Kyrie Irving. That'd be a good matchup for Cleveland. They're not going to be, while you could consider Kyle Lowry better than Kyrie Irving, it's certainly not a mismatch in anything where Toronto would look at that and be like, we have such a distinct advantage in that situation. Obviously, at small forward, Cleveland would have the advantage in that regard. Power forward, Cleveland again. Center, I'd say it'd probably be a bit of a wash. So when you look at DeMar DeRozan at the shooting guard position, that would be really where Toronto has their best matchup and most distinct advantage over any other position on the court, and that's where DeMar DeRozan would have to take over and guide this team. Now, I would pick Cleveland to win that series. Don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves as well. If the series were to happen today, though, I'd say Cleveland would probably win in 6 games, maybe even less. But it is incumbent on DeMar DeRozan to be the guy who's going to be able to carry this Toronto Raptors team to where they want to go and where any team wants to go, and that's the championship. But first things first, obviously with the Toronto Raptors, they would have to get out of the first round. I think they are going to make that step. I would be highly surprised if they don't. They're going to be the number 2 seed almost certainly. Looking at a team like an Indiana who they just beat last night, Chicago, Washington, Detroit, any of those teams, I would expect them to still come up a little short of getting to the number 7 seed. So I would look at it, can Indiana climb out of that 6th spot? Not really. Or excuse me, out of that 7th spot? Not really. They're a little bit behind that logjam, obviously, between 3 and 6, and they have a nice advantage over the teams who are 7 through 10, that is, Washington, Detroit, and the Chicago Bulls. So you're almost certainly going to have that matchup in the first round. They're going to get out of that. The second round we discussed, Miami is probably the team that would be their biggest challenge, but I would expect them to win that as well. And they're going to be playing in the conference finals almost certainly, barring any major upset in the second round, or if Cleveland somehow gets upset as well. So again, we discussed DeMar DeRozan is the guy for Toronto. He has the matchup that would be advantageous for them to win, and he is going to be the difference maker to whether or not the Toronto Raptors can win the Eastern Conference or not this season.